Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Welcome back, everybody, to the New Mainstream podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of culture, marketing, and business. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco. Today, I'm honored to have Dr. Sonya Grier on the show. Dr. Grier is a distinguished scholar and educator whose research explores the intersection of race, marketing, and social impact. She's currently a professor at American University, where she teaches courses like Race in the Marketplace and Marketing for Social Change. Sonya, welcome to the New Mainstream podcast.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, really excited. We had a great conversation our first time. I wish I would have recorded that. We
Me too.
could have been good to go, but glad we synced back up. And before we dive into your work, you told me a little bit about your journey. Would love to learn more about your career journey. How did you end up in academia and focusing on race in the marketplace? I know it's a really interesting story and would love for you to share that with our listeners.
Sure. I began my career, we talk about it this way, as a part-time cashier at Burger King in Detroit, Michigan during high school. And this was 1981, and the Burger King was owned by Brady Keys. And Brady Keys was the first Black franchisee in the US
Wow.
for Burger King. And he bought this franchise after getting a loan from a colleague. He was a football player, he had been a famous football player. And he got a loan from one of his colleagues because he couldn't get loan from a bank. So he was denied by banks for loans. So, as an impressionable teenager, I'm sort of thinking about this and this is registering. And I think this really planted a seed around notions that race plays a role in your ability to get financing and things like that. And so my first job out of college was at Kraft. And I worked on, exciting things, iconic products like Kraft marshmallows, caramels, and barbecue sauce. And I saw the way that race was and was not used in marketing, as well as learned really about the power of marketing and consumer research to shape narratives. What we did research on and what we put out in terms of campaigns gave a notion of who ate what, why it was important, the ways they ate it, and it really started to shape these narratives. And so that was something that I was really conscious of when I went back to school. I went back to get an MBA. And while being in the program, all this stuff about marketing and race is really in my head, but there wasn't really any race in the program per se. I noticed that there wasn't discussions of race in the cases that we studied in the classroom. There were not classes that were focused on racial dynamics in the marketplace. And I was very conscious of this, and I started an independent study with another colleague who was concerned about these same issues. And we did interviews with undergrads to develop a marketing plan for Kellogg, where I was at the time, to recruit more doctoral students of color. And after a year, Kellogg had the most Black doctoral students of any program, including me.
Oh, that's incredible.
Really, I think that project really showed me the power of consumer research in developing marketing that could really incite social change.
And so tell me that's so fascinating and I mean just kudos to you for getting more people of color into craft in a corporate setting. And I'm curious back then, what were some of the barriers? How did you get buy-in from such a large organization to get more PhDs, Black PhDs into that? Like what was that like?
I Well, for one, I think there was starting to be some consciousness around it. I was in a group because Kellogg was very student oriented. So the students really drove the things that happened in the business school. I was in a group called the Council on Diversity at Kellogg, which was trying to promote diversity into the school. I was also vice president of the Black Management Association. So both of these organizations were concerned about some of these issues, and we would bring them up to administration. I was also selected to be the student representative on the faculty council on diversity. So as these things were happening, there was a lot of discussion around them. And I said, hey, we could do an independent study. This gave me an opportunity to work with the professor directly and another student to look at these issues. It was free labor for them. I'm sure they were open to, really saying, okay, here's some students who are going to do this. That's great. Because that's what they wanted. They wanted students to take initiative on issues that were important to them. And so I really value my Kellogg education from that perspective of really pushing me to take initiatives to make the types of changes that I thought was necessary in that case.
Yeah, and also what's really I think unique about your experience, you started at Burger King, but there early on you saw the implication of ownership, right? From the franchisee owner, the hurdles he had to face. But then you were at Kraft, and so you saw the consumer side of things, right? So it's kind of a connection of from ownership to consumer and how race really affects all aspects of that supply chain in business, right?
Right. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say I was in a program called Leadership Education and Development, the LEAD program, which still exists today, and is to expose gifted high school students to careers in business. And so PepsiCo was our major sponsor. We went and visited not only major corporations, but also small businesses. And I can remember, certain people that I met, like Ernesta Prokop, who had started, she was the first Black woman to start an insurance agency and had one of the largest insurance agencies in the country. And she talked a lot about how that agency also gave back to the community. So I was able to see role models and models of using business for social impact and social change early on. That program, I was a senior in high school.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so, I mean, you've been instrumental, right? You've been a driving force in expanding the conversation since since you were a student, which is incredible about race and consumer markets. We're going through an interesting time now, I guess, to say the least, as it relates to D&I, as it relates to multicultural marketing. I'd be curious about your perspective and why you think it's critical for marketers and businesses to consider race beyond D&I, because unfortunately that's getting all the press, and I think lots of aspects of race are in the marketplace are getting lumped into that.
Right, right. I would say now DEI initiatives are certainly important. However, they don't always get to the specific issues of race. It's race, not diversity, that was underlined the redlining that supports the type of gentrification that we see now and issues in the housing market. So that history still exists today that we saw in terms of redlining. So we have a chapter in our Race in the Marketplace book that talks about how consumer research was really based on the notion of a white market. And so these historical issues still hold on. As long as I can remember, everything I learned in business school was about a general market, and then there were ethnic markets. That notion says, what's general market for? It's code for a white market. Those are racial issues that are embedded into the way we think about consumer research and marketing. And I think, moreover, we know that race has very specific effects. So, my research shows that consumers of color often face hyper surveillance, they get profiled in stores, they face discrimination and disrespect. And this happens across different types of markets. I'm talking from the grocery store to the bank to the hospital. And so all of these issues say we really have to think about race in particular because it's not diversity that gets somebody profiled at the grocery store or means that they don't get the type of access they need at a hospital. And so, really, the findings of the first 2 decades of my research really made it clear to me that you really have to understand the structural, historical, and social factors that relate to the racialization of different consumer segments. And I say racialization because it's not just race. Religious groups are racialized. um, different types of groups are racialized, and without understanding that, businesses can't really create inclusive markets. Saying that you're going to target diverse consumers really doesn't do it from an operational perspective. And so that's why I think the focus on race is really important. I also think it's really important in the classroom. One of the reasons is because we don't talk about it as much in the classroom. This is what we were pushing for when I was at Kellogg, and students are still pushing for it now. If you look at, what happened after 2020, that was what a lot of the students were saying. We need a more diverse faculty. We need courses that deal with these issues. And so that means that students don't really understand how to integrate the language of marketing and business with an understanding of how race plays out in the marketplace. And so I think that makes race really important and significant to examine as a particular dynamic in the marketplace, even though all of the related segments are really important.
And so, I'm thinking about our listeners. We have, you know, our listeners, thankfully, are people are interested in these types of issues like race, racialization. I think something that you're introducing that's maybe other guests haven't is kind of the historical implications, right? You mentioned redlining, and how that plays out now into the modern consumer. For someone interested in this, right, like our listeners, where can they start to contextualize some of these issues that you're talking about? Because I think most of us have just like a surface level understanding of race and racialization. If we want to talk about some of these structural issues, what's a good place to start as a marketer, as someone, as a practitioner?
I have the perfect place. That was such a great setup. I didn't know that you would ask that question, but I've got the perfect answer. So, I co founded an organization called Race in the Marketplace, and we created a book for that reason. Not only did we create the book, we made it open access so that anyone could read it if they wanted to. If you want a hard copy, you can go on Amazon or somewhere and order it if you wanted to do that. But you can go to our website, rimnetwork.net, and download a copy and read it for free. And in that book, we talk about an overview of why race in the marketplace is important. And then we've got 12 chapters that discuss issues of race from all around the world, everything from skin lightening creams to how the Roma are treated or not treated at hospitals in France. It's a very international volume, and we discuss race from a diversity of perspectives and across different types of markets.
Great, great. And can you shed a little bit of light on what's happening now in this point in time in the United States in particular? What's your perspective? I mean, I think because you mentioned 2020, that was a much different sentiment. I think, no, I don't think companies were investing a lot in not only D&I initiatives, but understanding consumers, understanding, I think, the premise about race in the marketplace. And now we're seeing a quote unquote backlash, companies pulling back. I would just love to hear your opinion about.
I think more than anything, it makes me sad. Because, after 2020, it seemed like for a bit that a lot of companies understood the importance of race in the marketplace and of addressing a lot of these racial issues. We did see quite a bit of woke washing as well, where companies would say, "This is really important to me," and just jump in without any real understanding or investigation of what was going on. And consumers said, "Hey, no, no, that's not authentic. You are just making that up. You can't just come in Black History Month and expect us to respond to this campaign." So I think consumers and employees are really savvy around these issues. As we see the pushback, the reason I say it makes me sad is because it suggests that companies didn't necessarily think it was the right thing to do. They were just going along with the prevailing winds. And if companies are going to move every time the political winds change, that makes it challenging to trust them, to believe in them. And trust is a core of relationships that make for strong brand loyalty and all of the consumer behaviors that companies want. So I think it's very tricky and risky for companies to pull back on things that they have said that they would do, because they're going to break bonds of trust that they might have started to create. And I think is also very sad for future business practitioners to think about the world and to look at it as this shifting scale. You know, we have both demographic issues that say America is changing. And so there's a demographic and a business rationale to focus on these issues. At the same time, it is the right thing to do. Equity is the right, approach and the right thing to do. You want to say you want things to be unfair in the marketplace. It's all about money. Whoever has the most toys, wins or whatever. That doesn't seem fair to me, and it makes me sad to think that that would be what businesses convey through their strategies and through their lack of understanding, appreciation, and emphasis on issues of race in the marketplace.
I 100% agree with you. That sentiment, it's just, you're so right. It's sad. And it's sad for me personally because I too felt that, right? As a company focused on helping companies understand these consumers in a research perspective, I've worked with a lot of these companies that, and I've had them on my podcast talking about the importance. And then for them to come out and say, hey, we're backing up, it has been very sad. It actually led me to do some digging on why. And because I guess I just wasn't satisfied that the political winds change and they dropped it, because there's other companies that have stood up to it.
Right.
Apple, Costco,
Costco, right.
Chase, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, which is interesting. Um, and so I looked into why, and part of it I think is the political win. Part of it from my research sounds like they're afraid of getting sued. There's some legal precedent there, right? Um, and so then I dug into what is the legal precedent, and actually there, and who's it coming from? It's conservative think tanks that are kind of leading the charge, and it sounds like they're using some of the foundational legislation meant to help diverse people in this country in terms of equity. They're using it again and essentially using this idea of reverse racism, reverse discrimination to sue these companies. Um, and again, I still don't think that's an excuse because there's companies standing up. I think to your point, also, um, it's critical to growth. The country's changing. That's something we that's done. That's happening. Gen Z is the most diverse generation in our nation's history. It's depending on how you slice the data, it's the first minority majority, right? I put quotation marks because you can't be the minority when you're the majority.
Right.
Um, but so I don't know. It's complicated, and um, yeah, it's sad and it's disappointing. But what I do think it's happening is, like, I don't think the investment is going to go away because these consumers are still buying things and they want to buy things with companies that align with their values. I think they're going to still invest in these things. I think they're just taking away the PR from it, which I don't know how to feel about that.
Right. There's a different framing around it and changing the names. My students are very adept at noticing changes that are happening in the marketplace. And I think it will whittle away at trust little by little. Before you would say black, now it's only inclusive. You won't even say diverse. And I think also that's part of the market's responsibility to be conscious of these changes in terms and to be clear what they mean. Um, there has been an effort, and it has been somewhat successful in many parts, to make DEI seem like the enemy, to make it a real negative term. I hear people who I know supported it, people that I know who supported DEI, who say, oh, well, you can't say that. Why would you even try to do that now? It's like people have just given it up.
It's
It's
working.
working.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest issues is this notion of preemptive compliance. Even as things are working their way through the legal system or before people do that research to understand is this legal or not, or right or not, people are preemptively complying to make sure that they are on the right side of the line without that understanding. And I think that's a real challenge that's going to weaken the ability to really push for the type of changes that we need to have equitable marketplaces.
Yeah, no, I mean, it reminds me of the quote. I mean, Jamie Dimon of CEO of JP Morgan Chase, when they were on a shareholder call, they were like, well, what are you going to do about these lawsuits making its way down the pipeline? And he was like, bring it on.
I love it. I love it. The ones that are standing firm, that we should definitely support them if we believe this is important. I've always thought we need to put our money where our beliefs and our values are.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, and it's, it's hard for it not to cross your mind, right? Like, I think we all go through that, right? As a company, we've been around for 14 years. There's people on our payroll that, responsible for health insurance, and we're incentivized to keep our company going. And it crosses your mind, okay, should we back up on our messaging? And it's like, no, we're going to double down on it because that's what we believe, right?
Yeah, that's great to hear.
So, talking a little bit about that, I mean, what, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest misconceptions brands have when it comes to marketing to diverse audiences?
There are a few misconceptions that brands have. I think one major misconception is that groups are homogeneous. And that's what the sometimes the diversity umbrella does. It makes you think, communities of color. We're going to target communities of color. What are communities of color? And are you saying that everyone under that umbrella has the same thoughts, beliefs, and are going to respond similarly? I mean, we know that, marketing strategy is about segmenting groups so that they are more similar within and different from other groups without. That's the basics of segmentation. So we cannot look at one particular group and just say Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, that they are all the same and that we could reach them with the same strategies. So I think we really have to begin to think about the nuances, because that's how you're going to reach groups. The whole emphasis on intersectionality that has come about is one way that I think will help companies to lean into the nuances of different groups. And that also will help companies to understand how different groups are similarly or differently situated, because it is that situatedness and the context around their behaviors and beliefs and their history around certain products or services that drives the way they make consumer decisions. And so that understanding is really necessary from a company perspective as a misconceptions. And I think also that, this notion that you can just jump in, you hear a lot, jump in where you are, which is important, but jump in where you are with an understanding of where you're going. Because if you don't understand where you're going to make mistakes. As I mentioned earlier, consumers and employees see when it's inauthentic. You can't just say, "Ooh, there's a new holiday. Ooh, there's Juneteenth. I'm going to create a product." We saw lots of companies have all kind of snafus during Juneteenth because they just created a product and threw it out there and thought everyone was going to be happy that they put red, black, and green on these products. And that didn't happen. It happened for some companies that might have been involved with these markets over time, but for companies who just jumped in or only jumped in February or Women's History Month or whatever it might be, they didn't accrue the benefits of that strategy. And so, in terms of a misconception, I would say the conception is that you really have to understand where you're going, and you really have to have a deep engagement with the communities that you want to market to.
And you've done some work on that, right? On targeted marketing, on its impact, both positive and negative. So, what are some examples of targeted marketing that's shaped industries like food, public health, consumer goods?
A couple of decades working on targeted food marketing and its impact on health disparities. Which is kind of ironic given that my first corporate job was at was at Kraft, working in food marketing research. So my research really started from this notion of thinking about the basics of target marketing. So target marketing helps to create an environment that is going to be resonant with a particular consumer. So reason that if people are going to get customized products, customized prices, customized promotions, and different prices, that it would create different food marketing environments for people. And that's what my first study found. Is that people live in different food marketing environments, and the environment for Black consumers tends to be, low nutrition, high calorie snacks and sweets and unhealthy foods. And so I published over 20 articles related to target marketing and food, and they all kind of converge on the findings that marketing strategies to consumers of color emphasize unhealthy foods, that they create these environments where healthy food is less accessible and more expensive. But at the same time, and this is interesting, communities of color are often more positive to target marketing. And so when you try to create resistance, people say you're being racist, or, get your hands off my soda. We don't want soda taxes. We don't want these types of things. So you really have to think about and understand where consumers are in order to design counter marketing interventions, because it's still the use of marketing to try to promote healthier food, or to try to help people understand and to demand healthier food in their neighborhoods.
And so, how do brands strike that balance?
In terms of, I think they really have to engage with consumers. There's a huge difference between me sitting in my office and doing research about a community, and me going out into the community and developing programs and practices with a particular community. So companies will have to use diverse voices in their storytelling. Make sure they have representation on their own teams who can help them to understand different communities. Um, Feature real people in their advertising and in their marketing. You don't always have to go get, actors and actresses. You can
Yeah.
go out into the communities and get that authenticity. And you want to make sure you avoid stereotypes and cliches, which, often, if you think about it, if you want to portray something, a stereotype, because it's often well known, it conveys it for you. But you really want to avoid those stereotypes and make sure that your representation is really nuanced and respectful. I mean, people want to be seen, but they want to be seen in a respectful way. And companies really have to research and understand cultural symbols and icons and the meaning of different aspects of a culture before they just jump in with some type of representation around it.
Is this related? I mean, one of the things I think that really stood out to me in doing research for this podcast was your idea about faux diversity. Is it is this related? Not, not relying on stereotypes.
Definitely relate the two. So this is the faux diversity came from some research I did with my colleague Vanessa Perry. We have a paper and a short documentary film called Dog Parks and Coffee Shops. And so we examined consumption practices in gentrifying neighborhoods. And what we learned is that people often move to these neighborhoods, new residents, because they like the diversity that was there. We had people in our movie say, I didn't want to live downtown by the monuments or anything. I wanted to live where there was interesting diversity and to be amongst different types of people. But at the same time, people didn't necessarily engage with the people. They engage with the food, they engage with the activities, but there wasn't this sort of integrating going on around the actual people, and people getting to know each other, which is a necessary condition to create strong communities. So the notion of faux diversity refers to this superficial or performative inclusion of diverse cultures without real mixing between them. And it came about because we saw it. We were actually at a house music event at a place on U Street, which is one of the gentrified areas in Washington, D.C., and we saw all of this diversity. Yet it was diverse groups that were separate. And so it's this micro segmentation where you've got a group of Asians over here, a group of Black people, a group of Hispanics. You didn't really see lots of mixed and diverse group despite all of this diversity. And so faux diversity really can also manifest as tokenism in neighborhoods or cultural appropriation, all of this notion of being really attracted to the diversity itself, but not being attracted to the people that really reflect the diversity.
And kind of taking this your idea further, or connecting it rather to what we're talking about corporations. It's like it's that example you gave of it's easy to sit at our desk and do research and look at the data as, like, let's say, as a brand marketer or a research in a Fortune 500 company. But it's so different to go out and talk to these diverse groups, right? I mean, can we extend that metaphor to faux diversity in terms of marketing, right? Like, get out there and talk to the community and see, confirm or deny some of the research that you've done, right? By going out and actually talking to these groups you're trying to reach.
I love that. I love that. I think we're going to extend and expand the definition because that's very true. You have a lot of marketers who are thinking about diversity and talking about doing diversity, but you really wonder, have they engaged with people? Have they gone out into the market and seen how their business strategy plays out, how
Right.
people respond to it? Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, no, that's what stood out to me. And I guess on that point, this is a good segue to talk about the next generation of marketers. I mean, I think I'm hopeful as I talk to new marketers entering our space. Um, but you're teaching courses in race in the marketplace and marketing for social change. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing incoming students face in discussing race in a business context?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the most important issues in the field of diversity and race is how do we teach the next generation so they are prepared? We constantly see controversial advertisements, controversial strategies in the marketplace. So you wonder, were people trained to understand these dynamics? Could it have been prevented? And so I think one of the biggest challenges is language, being able to discuss racial issues from a business or marketing perspective. Most of my students tell me that they don't talk about these issues in any other class. So they don't know how to integrate issues around race, which are already sensitive and sometimes not talked about, even in the social sciences or in other areas, with the language of business and marketing. And I think about when I finished my PhD, because I was at Northwestern for a while, for 5 years. I had a lot of friends who were in the MBA program, and they would often call me and say, "I was in this meeting, and I see this ad strategy, etc. It's very offensive. How do I say something?" Having the language to be able to talk about it in a way that communicates, a potential offense. But you know how people respond if you say something's racist. And so
Yeah.
you can't really just say that. You have to know how to communicate it in the same way you would talk about any other strategic points. And if you've never had the opportunity to practice doing that, it's very hard to do so. So this is the same thing that my students are telling me now, that they don't know how to. I have students come to office hours and say, this is very hard for me, or this is kind of scary to talk about some of these issues. And I say, look, we've created a safe space to be able to do this. You want to practice now so that when you get in the marketplace, especially, thinking about the rollbacks and the things we're seeing now, that you are able to say this in a way that communicates to people that you understand what's going on and that there might be some challenges in the marketplace in relation to a particular strategy. You don't have to say, this is racist and I feel this way, or that this is offensive. You need to be able to talk in a language of whatever your context is. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges. I think it's really crucial for students to understand how to talk about issues of race in the marketplace, or they won't be able to intervene when they see potentially challenging marketing strategies.
Give us some examples, and I know it's so nuanced, like when bringing this up, but it is actually something that I've had on my podcast that people don't speak up because it's probably one of the most divisive concepts in our country, right? Talking about race.
Right.
But let's talk about this example. If you're a marketer and you see an ad that your company's going to run, and it's got a stereotype, their gut feeling. How do you bring that up in a business context? What's a good way to tell your manager, to tell an executive, hey,
Have we done any research on how consumers might respond to this particular ad? Because as I look at it, I could see there might be some potential challenges where everyone doesn't respond the way the rest of the team, responds. The rest of the team seems to think this is a great advertisement, but I have some concerns. And I think from a practical business perspective, it would make more sense for us to have some data that helps us to know that this will resonate with consumers as opposed to potentially offend consumers.
I love that. You're anchoring it in data, taking away any kind of personal opinion, right? That's great. That's great.
And I think that's what I try to teach my students so that they can go wherever they are. They may go to nonprofits, they may go to marketing, they may go to PR, wherever they are. I want them to understand that you can intervene in things that you see might contribute to inequity. You just have to know how to do it. And I have students come back who've taken the class, 3 years ago, who say that they do just that, and they're always so proud of it. I had some students come back and do an alumni panel in my class because they wanted to show the current students how valuable what they were learning was.
I have to share a story with you, even as someone who's been in this space, and I'm talking about dealing with issues of race and marketing almost my whole professional career. I was invited to a company. I won't say the name, but you're definitely aware of them, an iconic American company. Um, it was a sales trip, and went there. Was going to do a presentation about our capabilities, and someone on the marketing team that was kind of coordinating all this prior to the meeting, because I was meeting him and his boss and some other executives. It's like, oh, hey, we're working on these concepts for Latino marketing. I want to show you. I'm like, okay, great, cool. And it was like these storyboards of out of the home advertising billboards aimed at Latino consumers. Um, I won't describe it. It was like, I remember the boards. There was, four boards, all of them just so offensive and stereotyped. And I, we're talking a huge company, okay? And he was so proud of them, right? And so excited.
Mm.
Um,
Did you say anything?
no, I didn't. And it was, I didn't, because we weren't involved in the creative, we weren't involved in the research, but I always feel guilty that I didn't say anything because they were so offensive that it was hard to, you know, to 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 vocalize, like, how are you even considering this? I could have used your quote there, like, "Hey, have you done any research?" And the irony is, I own a research company, but yeah, it was bad. It was bad. Yeah, yeah, and it's like people question what we do to this day, and it's like, well, that's why we do what we do, because people still rely on these stereotypes that are really offensive.
People, I think there's this belief sometimes in business that, I've been here for 10 years. I'm the SVP, senior vice president, etc. I know my brand. I understand what people think. I remember when I first got to Kraft and I'm in market research and I'm like, there's no target marketing on barbecue sauce. I happen to think there are quite a few cultural nuances related to barbecue and barbecue sauce. No, there's only the only difference is that men barbecue more than women, and those were things. And so but no one had ever looked at the issue. No one had ever dug into the research. And so that's why I think representation within the company is really important, because it helps people, although not everyone thinks alike, but at the same time, having a diversity of people gives you a broader set of experiences from which to draw. Someone else may think of a question that you may not think of, and that's going to make your strategies, your research, everything that much stronger.
Yeah, and there's so much data to support that, which is the frustrating part of this backlash. No, this has been incredible. So we're coming up on the end here, but as we look ahead, let's look to the future. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for brands to engage with race and marketing in a meaningful way?
I think working with communities, not in communities, not selecting, particular people from communities, working with communities and developing activities, strategies, events that help people to develop these relationships. We've known for a while that relationships are really core to creating any type of brand loyalty and people's favorability towards different opportunities, and thinking about how you can do things that help to serve the goals that you have, which are often to make profit, but also bring some type of social profit and bring some empowerment to the community as well. That creates opportunities for entrepreneurs, or for opportunities for youth to understand what the business is doing, so that you're just not coming and being extractive in communities, but that you are working with communities to help make it a more equitable environment for everyone.
I love that social profit. That's great. Um, well, thank you so much, Sonia, for joining. Amazing conversation. I feel like we could talk another hour. So,
I know, now you got me going.
so you did share your website. So for people that want to learn more about race in the marketplace, I highly recommend. I visited that for preparation for this interview. Can you share that URL again for our listeners? And of course, we'll make it available in the notes.
Yes, it's rimnetwork.net, RIM network.net. And we have not only our free downloadable book, we also have list of marketing research articles that address all different types of groups and other resources for people to understand what race in the marketplace is and how they might get involved in helping to empower other communities.
Great. Again, great conversation. Thank you, Sonia, and thank you to all our listeners.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.